Everyone, thank you for joining us. I guess this is a pretty full house. I guess everybody wants to know what the fuck a citadel is. So we're gonna try and figure that out. Before we kick off, just for those who don't know the gentleman, I'll get you to go around and do a quick introduction. We'll start with yourself, Rahim.
I am Rahim Taghizadegan from Austria, Vienna, Austria. Came here. I'm an Austrian economist in both senses, which is quite rare these days. I'm an investor as well. I'm involved with some kinds of Bitcoin citadels. We'll probably talk about that. And I'm chief economist at the Free Cities Foundation.
I am Ben.
Thank you.
Yeah, let's do clapping for everybody. Why not?
Thank you.
I'm Ben, so I work on some free and open source software projects in Bitcoin, LMBits, Nostr. I worked on some Nostr stuff early on. I'm a sort of lefty anarchist type, very skeptical of the Citadel concept, but I do believe in decentralizing power. And it's more a question of, for me, scale, and then also hierarchy and how a Citadel will work, to whether I'm, sort of approve or disapprove of it. So I'm happy to be up here as the maybe the counter voice, although I deeply respect all of my panel members, of course.
Thank you. Round of applause.
Hi, so I'm Peter. I'm the managing director of the Free Cities Foundation, and we're an organization that works to try and create a concept called Free Cities, which is a kind of self-governing community that has a special focus on upholding individual rights and freedoms. We're working with projects across the world in Latin America, North America, Africa, Europe, at varying stages of development. I'm probably going to have an opportunity to mention a bit about those today. And those are communities that I think are quite sympathetic to Bitcoiners and looking to attract Bitcoiners. So hopefully we can discuss more about that.
Fantastic. And then just a quick background on me. Some of you guys know me, but I've been in the Bitcoin space for a while. I was nomad for about 5 or 6 years, been to like 50 countries, and very interested in the Citadel sort of concept and idea. Many of you guys might know me from like the remnant pieces and things like that. And tomorrow I'll actually be announcing a Citadel-esque project called Atlantis here at 9:30 a.m. It's hopefully a framework for Citadels to sort of build and emerge on. But enough about that. Let's get into this little discussion. So maybe to begin with, like the word Citadel is thrown around a lot, particularly since we've all sort of, Bitcoin is this parallel network, and the concept, at least that I understand of Citadel, is like a parallel society. But I'd love to get each of your definitions of what is a Citadel? How do you conceptualize it? What does it actually mean to you? And whoever wants to go first, and then we'll go around.
Okay, I'll start, if you're happy. I mean, first and foremost, the Bitcoin Citadel is a meme, and it was intended to be a derogatory meme, just to point out how Bitcoiners tend to be even morally reprehensible for trying to go their own way. And over time, as with many derogatory terms, for example, the Austrian School of Economics started out as a derogatory term. These Austrians, compared to the idealistic Germans, this term was adopted in a more positive way, because Citadel, of course, conveys a sense of safety, maybe even privacy, but most importantly, a sense of community. And that's a very deep longing of most people. And I think this longing for community, and think about, we've seen with money that the structure, the institutional structure we get used to, doesn't really merit our trust anymore. And then most of the institutions are losing trust rapidly. That, of course, those people who were early in considering institutional alternatives on the monetary scheme would be interested in alternative governance structures. In the reality, a lot of Bitcoin citadels in practice are actually real estate divestments of people who have Bitcoin, and maybe for either consumptive purposes, you want to have something, do something other than Bitcoin, we want to enjoy life. So that's one reason for divesting, I'd say, spending your Bitcoin. And the other reason is a very long-term investment, which may even be considered a kind of philanthropy, you're thinking about how should my children, the children of my children, potentially live, and if there's some kind of legacy I can leave behind. So I think it's quite different aspects and things, and I think all of these aspects are quite interesting and fascinating.
Okay, who else has a definition? Go.
Yeah, so for me, I live in South Wales in the UK, and we have around 2,000 castles, Norman castles. So we have one in our village, and to me, it's like a big stone structure, which is pretty, but once upon a time, it was very hierarchical, and there were those who lived inside the castle walls who were, well off and had a good life, and those outside the castle walls who would come and work for those in the castle, but they didn't have such a good life. The anarchist in me, I want, freedom and liberty for as many people as possible. And I feel the freedom of association, freedom of movement is very, very important. The concept of a future to me, where we have private citadels which have limited access for people, to me it's like a dystopia. I want as much freedom for people as possible. I think that with anarchism itself, of course, anarchism has a tendency towards devolution to smaller communities, to Dunbar numbers and below, where decision-making can be done in a democratic way from the ground up. And then the question within anarchism is always like, well, we live in a globally connected world. And what makes Bitcoin very exciting to me as a free and open source protocol is that you can have this big apparatus, this superstructure, which the whole world can access, and nobody is limited from. And it means that you can have a future with evolved communities, but they still get access to those freedom technologies. And Nosta's the same. So I feel that a lot of these things will be replaced by free and open source protocols. And as an anarchist, I don't limit no rulers to just state. I also include big corporations and most hierarchies of power because they're corrupt. And for me, that's what a citadel is. But I'm happy to kind of imagine a more humanistic, altruistic citadel. Maybe, like Madeira being a citadel, or something like the Swiss cantons or something. But freedom of movement, freedom of association, liberty for as many people as possible is my primary interest.
Yeah, so I think Rahim did a great job of giving the general historical background to how the Bitcoin Citadel idea emerged. It was in response to a 2013 post on Reddit where this critical poster described this dystopian future whereby hyper-Bitcoinization had taken place, and then in this new world, because traditional governments had collapsed because they weren't able to track people and their Bitcoin wealth and acquire revenues, people were forced into these kind of guarded citadels, like the ones Ben describes in Wales, I suppose, to a certain extent, where they were kind of isolated from the rest of the communities. What I would argue is that the actual reality of the people that are trying to establish citadels today, and I would say that realistic, the closest thing to Bitcoin citadels, communities that are being welcoming of Bitcoiners, that have policies that defend the individual rights of Bitcoiners to use their funds as they wish, to live in communities where there is a kind of more market-focused approach to regulation. The reality of these communities is kind of very different from that. They're places where, like I would name Prospera and Ciudad Morazan as two prominent examples in Honduras, where they are run by private developers, but unlike in the traditional feudal system, they are free and open to anyone that wants to be a part of this system, anyone that agrees to some basic rules for cooperation. It's unlike a feudal system in that, previously you couldn't become a landowner in medieval Britain or medieval Europe unless you were part of a nobility and you had certain connections with a king and you were part of a very strict hierarchy. In these systems, that's not the case. Anyone that agrees to a set of rules, which are broadly, I would say, in most circumstances based on fairly libertarian principles, is free and available to join. And I would say that the early indications we have from those projects are very positive, and we're already seeing some great Bitcoin developments happening.
Okay. Is there a difference in any of your minds between a citadel now and a citadel 50 years from now? Like, what is that difference?
Well, it's becoming more and more something real and not just a meme, and certainly not a utopia or a dystopia. Special administrative zones, I always have a hard time announcing that, have been around for quite a while, and they have been quite successful. And the general principle is actually something that was already mentioned in the only book that came really close in predicting Bitcoin as a cryptographic internet money. The same book predicted that we'll see citadels in the sense of governments competing for citizens. That was the sovereign individual. And of course, that book was spot on. At the time, it seemed like a prophecy, but right now everyone knows that, of course, mobility has increased, in particular the more entrepreneurial people, and that's a challenge. And we see already the effect of that competition of jurisdictions to attract productive people and to make it easier for them. And we've already seen for quite a while jurisdictions trying to attract Bitcoiners. So that's nothing new, it's nothing utopian, that's already happening. So in 50 years from now, of course, they'll ripen into something that can be compared to potentially a new Singapore, Hong Kong, or a new Renaissance, if it's really like the attractive locations being able to compete for those who are productive in any area, not just Bitcoin.
Anyone have anything to add to that?
As in, how will they be different in 50 years?
Like, how do you envision it? So like, because I'm a big fan of, or I like his older work, Curtis Yarvin, or Mencius Moldbug. Like, and he's got he was one of the early ones who wrote about, this idea of patchwork, right? And the city-state model, and kind of, he positions the governance structure more like CEO kings, which I tend to agree with. But I'm just curious on how you envision, like, today it's a bit more of a meme, and it's sort of starting with these like smaller free cities, etc. But there's still like, it's still not strong, you know what I mean? It's not deeply rooted anywhere. So like, what is the future of this thing? What does it look like?
Yeah, so I think The Sovereign Individual, super interesting book. It was published in 1997, and it made quite a few predictions about what the world was going to be like. It made very accurate predictions about the rise of digital currency, which are quite remarkable if you go back and read that to see how closely that resembles Bitcoin. With a couple of slight technical differences about the cryptography, but nonetheless, it was a very strong prediction. They also made predictions about the power of nation states and the ability of individual people and small groups of people to kind of escape the clutches of the modern nation state. Then there's various predictions about how people would be able to hide their wealth, which probably haven't become true very much. I would say it's actually got more difficult to do that in the last 20 or so years. But there are other predictions like the kind of fragmentation of nation sovereignty, which I think have proved to be very, very accurate. At the time the book was written, there were about 500 special economic zones across the world. The figure today is more like 5,400. So there's been a 10 times increase in the number of special zones. So zones within countries that have their own unique set of jurisdictions, judicial powers. And we've also seen the rise of digital nomadism that's predicted in the book as well. There's now 35 million digital nomads worldwide, up from, say, 10 million about 5 years ago. So I think, to answer the question, in 50 years or so, we will see those trends continue. We'll see more and more small jurisdictions that people are moving to, more equivalents to Hong Kong, Singapore, Prospera, Dubai, that are kind of competing on a global level to attract this ever-growing number of digitally mobile people who are able to operate without the constraints of the kind of industrial revolution economy, where your place of work and your living were very much tied geographically. That's all changing, and I expect that to continue.
Indeed.
I think in 50 years' time, I'd like softer borders. I'd like more freedom of movement. More freedom of association. From what I've seen of places where rich people kind of clump together, maybe it's somewhere like Costa Rica, then, you have the rich white people, they're living in the fancy, chalets, and then you have the poor brown people living in the shitty favelas, and they're the ones who do all the work. And I don't want to see a future like that. And I feel like there is always a lean with humanity, of course, because of the master-slave dialect or what have you, that you will want to oppress your fellow human in one way or another. But I think we're actively fighting that. We're actively fighting that tragedy of the commons. When we look at like software, for example, and communities online, like Twitter or Facebook, they're walled gardens, right? I don't want a walled garden. It's a prison. I want freedom. I want Noster. And I want that also to apply in the real world as much as possible. I imagine maybe there's dark times ahead, But hopefully humanity will, I went with the Star Trek utopia, man.
Can you have a garden without a wall though?
Can I have a garden without a wall? Yeah, I mean, you can have a commons. That's what a commons is. So look at the Charter of the Forest after Magna Carta. So when the king owns all the forest, and then the poor people are dying and starving, then you have Magna Carta and you have the Charter of the Forest, which allows people to go and hunt in the king's forest and gather food, right? And then there's this tragedy of the commons that private ownership comes in, starts taking the forest, blah, blah, blah. And they're all centralized. But it's something we just have to fight, that urge. And we've had maybe 100, 150 years, 100 years of a greater liberty for people and greater freedom of movement. I want softer borders. I want cultural, culture is very important, different cultures, foods, wine, whatever. But I want to be able to travel freely. And I think with effects which are happening on the planet right now, which you may not agree with, I believe that climate migration is we're going to have to really address people's ability to move around. And yeah, just an anarchist utopia. That's what I'm aiming for.
I've got a lot to say, but I want to give it to you.
Well, I love to challenge you there. I have deep respect for that perspective, and it's critical here because Luca Magnotta, more or less, I mean, the original criticism was very much based on that values. But let me come from the other side and challenge it. And I think the best way is, I mean, we see in these days a kind of weaponization of these thoughts, and I'd call victimization. It's like, oh, the poor people that are left out. And of course, you can have respect for that, but usually it's abused. And I think Ayn Rand used it the best, and I put up an extreme example ethically, so to say, but I think Ayn Rand was spot on in realizing something, that this egalitarian line of thought can be used, and it's used because it's a crazy idea to consider the gated community the dystopia. You have to look outside of the gated community to understand why it's there, why it's necessary. Now, going to South Africa, for example, and still talking about the garden for everyone and the commons, and now let go of your gated communities because it's so unfair of you to hide behind walls. That's so anti-natural in a sense. I mean, you're blaming fathers and mothers for caring about their children, the safety of their children, for just a utopian idea of having that commons for everyone, where everyone is free to go. Which is not at all in accordance with the history we've seen. Of course, the citadel is not just the castle of the feudal lord. The citadel is the city within which limits of the city wall you are granted liberty because you are able to exert responsibility. You're accountable within that structure, and you have to delimit the structure somehow. You wouldn't have to if we were in a perfect world and everything would be great, and there would be no danger and no one wanted to go after you. But in the real world as it is, let's start with small places. And it's the great thing about the bottom-up process. Let me set up my wall. If I'm wrong, then of course I just imprison myself and I'll figure out and I have to go out again. But telling me, no, you can't put up a fence because I know for sure that you're on the wrong side of the fence. It's like, come on. Let me try to get my own small piece. And if it's fine, it's working out, I'll invite you in, of course. Fences are not there to keep you out or you out. Fences are there to delimit accountability, to figure out who is sharing a common set of values to live together peacefully. And usually they're fairly low, the fences. It's just, okay, that's my accountability, my responsibility. I care about that part of the garden. You care about that part, and maybe we have a joint part as well, but let's delimit it. So we don't have those people abusing that mindset who just want to consume, who just want to take everything and not have fences and not have walls, because then you don't see those people prying off your wealth and getting away with it because they can present themselves as the morally superior alternative even. And that's the worst kind of stuff. And I think Ayn Rand was spot on, and then you can even read Nietzsche on that. I don't agree with much, but on that victim mindset, I totally agree with that perspective. And I think that's the best and biggest challenge to that kind of egalitarian reproach towards Bitcoin citadels.
I agree. I actually agree with much of what Rahim said. People should be free, of course, to go and make their free city and their citadel. And I'm not going to stop that. The weaponization of egalitarianism was very much recognized by Mikhail Bakunin in the First International Working Men's Club. And he was one of the great anarchists. And he recognized that Marx's approach to taking state and trying to use that to bring about, a revolution and more equality would be weaponized, and you'd have the red bureaucracy. So I agree with that, and it should definitely be something which doesn't happen through state and force. I don't want state. I want to get rid of it. Okay? But I like the idea that when we move into a future, you won't need that gated community. You won't need those big fat walls. Of course, people can live however they want to live, but they're not good. You won't need to have those. And it's okay to be egalitarian, altruistic, and want the Star Trek utopia. But I actually agree with a lot of what you said.
So quick question. You mentioned culture before. So my understanding of culture and sort of my study of history is that culture is downstream of territory. And the way a culture establishes itself is by having some sort of border, some sort of differentiation with another group. And you get diversity of culture when you have many different territories who each have different norms, different beliefs, different religion, different climate, different terrain, different food, different everything, right? And my fear and my biggest hesitation with like no borders is that instead of multiple individual cultures, you get one homogenous culture. You basically get a Starbucks on every corner. Like when I went to Bali the first time 15 years ago, I was like, fuck are people doing a McDonald's here? Like you're in Bali. Like why is there a McDonald's? Why is there a Starbucks? But like you get this sort of, and that's not to say that there shouldn't be a McDonald's or a Starbucks. If some
corporations, man, Svetski said it first.
Sorry?
Saying these corporations, man, we've got to get rid of them.
It's not even about that. So it's not even the corporation. It's just the fact that the local communities, the local cities are losing their culture because of open borders and because anyone can just go anywhere. Whereas when you have, like, I can imagine a time, like the reason why Europe, for example, has a lot of culture is because Europe was a melting pot of multiple feudal states and competing citadels. Like they were different, and there's so much diversity in that versus the fake diversity of let's just bring everyone into a cultural melting pot. Like you don't get any culture then. You just get, it's kind of like taking a palette of colors. You got blue, green, red, orange, yellow, and then let's just mix it all together. And then you get one big blob of gray, right? And that's sort of like the analogy that I kind of think of. So anyway, I'd like to hear your thoughts on that.
I mean, I feel that there is plenty of multicultural environments like London, and where you can access lots of different cultures. And it's the most multicultural city in the world. And you've got easy access to those cultures. I'm not saying I want everyone to be homogenized and turned into the same person. Myself, I practice what I preach. I live in an anarchist community completely off-grid in South Wales, in a forest. We've got a very different culture in the way we do things to the people outside of our forest. But people, they love it. They walk through. There's no barbed wire fences. There's no walls. But the way we live is very much different to the way the normal people live over there. And that's fine. And people can enjoy the way we live in our culture, and we can go and enjoy the way they live in their culture. But I'm not promoting homogenizing people. I'm promoting greater access to culture by freedom of movement and softer borders. Europe's a good example. So for a period, we had very soft borders where we could just drive around Europe, and we could enjoy going into Germany and drink some beer, and then go to France and buy a lovely French baguette. And they're very French for French, Germans for Germans, and historically there's so much there to define those cultures, thousands of years of development. But the exchange of culture, ideas, that's when humanity first started to take hold and first started to the trade routes. That's when people really started to come out of the grim caves and actually start to develop society.
Wasn't the trade defined by the fact that there was different borders?
No, you had different resources in different areas, and you had to move them around. So wars and borders got in the way of trade.
Can I make a comment as well on the idea of the borders? Because I think, like, looking at the reality of what we've got in Honduras at the moment, it kind of addresses the borders point, and also the point you were saying about, privileged communities sort of living in an isolated way in distinction from the rest of the population. There are borders in the existing zones, but the borders are there primarily because these are in incredibly dangerous parts of the world. Like, Honduras has one of the highest homicide rates in the world. It's next to a city that has one of the biggest murder rates in the world. And there's a huge amount of demand to live within this city from the local population because they're seeking that local security. They've basically sold local security there. Like, people can leave, with small businesses, can leave their fridges outside of the house. They can leave solar panels. As a solar panels business is set up, they can leave their equipment outside because they know that like it's going to be protected. This would be completely unthinkable in the rest of Choloma where they're based. And also 90% of the residents living in this zone are low-income Hondurans that are making a few $100s a month. We specialize, like this particular community is trying to make the rents as affordable as possible for everyday Hondurans. So it costs $120 to rent an apartment there, and you get all the security and everything alongside that. And the point I make about borders is that, like, actually, sure, you want to have a border, but that's not because you want to keep out the vast majority of people. It's a bit like, think about a shopping mall. Like, these entities are run kind of by private businesses. Like, if a shopping mall, sure, a shopping mall has walls and it has security, but the key thing that shopping malls are doing is not trying to keep everyone out. They're actually putting out adverts and spending a lot of money trying to get people in. And that's exactly what these cities are doing in reality. They're trying to be as welcoming as possible because they've got a profit motive to have more individual residents. And also more individual residents makes for more interesting culture. It makes for more thriving communities. So I think the reality of like having walls to keep people out is not really playing out in terms of the actual projects we're seeing. I would agree with Ben that I want to see a world where there is more movement, more interchange of cultures, where it's easier to move, but also a place where there are those security provisions in place, because in many parts of the world, that's a huge concern and a huge issue undermining the
I live in
economy.
Brazil, trust me, I know.
There are a few paradoxes I have to challenge you on. And the one is, of course, this idea, community with diversity of culture, where's the melting pot with the Starbucks and so on. What we found out in the Free Cities Foundation was actually that what most people want is a small, homogeneous community, like the village to raise your children, the safe village to raise your children, more like an anarchist community. So most of the projects that get started bottom up is like that, families trying to band together and seeking their community. Unfortunately, what most people need is something else. It's the nodes and the connections of a city to create wealth. You want to have income, you have to care for your family. Of course, once you have wealth, then you can find your citadel. And most of the citadel projects we see just people who have stacked early and then divesting into nice castles, even villas, nice locations. That's great. There's nothing wrong about that. It's just something completely different, and one has to be honest about that. So, of course, the city as the open place where everyone moves, and of course we are all the most similar. We're at the lowest common denominator. The preferences we all share are very similar. It's the higher level preferences where we are different, where we are diverse, and usually it's like a pyramid of when you're able to afford to show off your identity in these higher regards and so on. And in the past, that was solved in a better way. You had different governance structures for a web of cities, which were very different from the countryside. They were so different, even the culture and the language was different. And that was the old structure of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, for example. And it was the whole of Europe, where you had a city where different people lived than on the countryside. And it was a very, very complicated pattern, which made a lot of sense, but of course was destroyed by the rise of the nation state and the territorial principle, which hopefully we will be able to supersede in the future. And then, of course, with all the criticism against corporations and the monotony, homogeneity of modern cities, it's very hard to distinguish between the distortions of our fiat system and actual preferences, and then, of course, unconscious preferences as well. So what we have with the fiat system is not that it's a totally different world from the one we like. It's an exaggerated world. Of course, built on some preferences that are there, but in a very distorted way, which leads to a lot of counter-reaction. But that has happened. There was another experience in Vienna and many cities of the time, which were the biggest cities on the planet. It's actually the people that go there, they experience that kind of exaggeration of credit and finance and everything that's linked to it, and they counteract forcefully with a kind of nostalgia and romanticism and wanting to destroy the city It's the city that's nurturing, unfortunately, that kind of intellectuals as well that have the longing. For most people on the planet, they have a longing to go to a city and be it in a slum just to have a means, honest means of income to support themselves and their family. And that's why I see, of course, is the greatest potential for the planet. For the privileged, it'll be the small gated community citadels, and there's nothing at all wrong about that. But for the great mass of people that are still seeking wealth, it'll be the cities with the Starbucks. And hopefully we'll have more of those and bigger cities of those in the future as well. And we'll need better governance models for that in particular to live the quality of life of where most people on the planet will live in 50 years, in the big cities. And the big cities are terribly dysfunctional if you look to Africa, for example. And there's so much upside to bring better governance rules to that kind of cities that are crucial for wealth generation.
Agreed. All right. We're finished. Gentlemen, thank you all for joining. I mean, unless you guys... Okay, final word. Let's go.
I would say in anarchism we say a better world is possible. And of course, free cities, your citadels, make them. I'll come visit. I might not live there, but I'll come visit and have a cup of tea. But ultimately, a better world is possible. And hierarchy, I want it to, I believe that state will become superfluous, corporations will become superfluous and replaced by maybe big cooperatives. And that's what I hope for. But, let's see how it plays out. And, good luck with the Free City movement and project. And if we can help at all with our software and bits, onboarding these people to Bitcoin and get them to use Lightning, then we're going to help, because as much real-world use case we can get, the better.
Yeah, I would say that the beauty of the whole Free Cities idea is that there's no one single governance model. There are many different models that are being conceptualized, and there's a few that have been tried out in practice. And if you are someone that has a sort of vision of society based on cooperatives, then we would love for you to try it out. And we can work with you on legal frameworks in order to make that happen, so that the system is protected. And yeah, if Ben or anyone else wants to come and visit some of these Free City projects to see what they're like, to see whether they have this sort of, whether they're vibrant communities with people on a mixture of incomes, then you'll be very welcome. Please come and speak to me. We can arrange for you to come and visit. I'm sure you'll find them to be very, very nice places. And I think they're going to be the future.
Fantastic. Rahim, Ben, Pete, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.